Well, hello again, folks. Today I'm going to run through some things on the game theory side. It's going to be mostly text and voiceover. I'm not going to spend too much time looking for images for it because it's kind of long. And I want to get through this stuff. And at the end, I'm going to summarize and conclude and give you a lot of resources and references and books to look at. Basically because I think it'll help your critical thinking skills, it'll help you make better decisions, and it will help you have greater agency or greater personal power in your life. So I think it's important to look at game theory not as something that's derogatory or anything like that, but something that's useful. A lot of leaders claim they understand game theory. I don't think they really do. I think that intuitively, naturally, as people, we can't help but play in a game theoretic way. So there's a theory behind how we play with other people when we want to persuade or get something or achieve something or win. And whether you're Saddam Hussein against America or whatever the thing is, it's a fascinating story, by the way. Incomplete information, overconfidence, bias, all these kind of things come into play. And if you understand them and can look at them in yourself, you can probably make slightly better decisions that are less risky, less costly, and less dangerous to the rest of us. So I watched the Republican debate. That was a circus, but all the candidates said something that was interesting and I kind of agreed with. A lot of them seemed to lie a lot, or perhaps they didn't lie. They were ignorant, or maybe not ignorant, but they just lack knowledge about what they're talking about. So they're just vomiting talking points, hot button talking points to pander to their base or their voters or whatever. Of course, you know, the people who are behind the politicians, who back them and really finance them and give them jobs when they're not in office, don't care about anything but a candidate that can win, so that they can use that leader when they're in office and then co-opt their fame and expertise when they're out of office by giving them cushy jobs where their name recognition matters. These aren't experts usually, like Nikki Haley or people like that. They're fairly common people with fairly common backgrounds and understanding of the world. So overconfidence bias is when you tend to feel what you overestimate your knowledge, skills, and abilities when you shouldn't. And it affects your ability to make decisions, and you deviate from reality and you kind of fall for your own BS. So Dunning-Kruger is a little bit different. You might overestimate your skills and abilities in a different way. But you could also be an expert who just takes it for granted that everyone around him or her understand what he or she is doing or talking about. That's also Dunning-Kruger. And you're like, you know, they really don't understand you, so you might want to simplify your communications a little bit or provide some background information and some context before you go running off on it, telling us all what it is, you know. Anyway, I won't go into that. I could do an hour on that debate, breaking that thing down. But so many people do it on the internet, so you don't need me to do it. But man, I'm telling you, from my point of view, it's a circus. And I just think that you have a lot of people who are more concerned about money, and the voters are more concerned about money too. So it's a match made in heaven. So my hope is that everybody believes in heaven and that we can all go to it someday, because it's just not real what they're talking about. They're not really getting it. But it hasn't changed, since I've been watching these debates. They're the same all the time for 30 years. It's just like, this is the best we can do. The discourse doesn't get any smarter, and it's not going to get any smarter with Chat GDP or whatever other tools we wind up having. Human beings have to make an effort to learn things, and they have to make an effort to cooperate with one another, and so on. Yeah, you know the drill. So until we can get back with each other face to face and really help each other to understand things and to learn, there's going to be a lot of disinformation, misinformation, and so on. It's not a signal to noise problem. Yeah, there's a fire hose of information, but the problem is we don't know how to discern what the signal is. This is why I'm talking about game theory, to help you better discern what the signal is. And then you can just forget about the noise. A lot of these experts who, pundits on TV and so on, they have overconfidence bias. You can't really trust what they say, at best with a grain of salt. They get on, I'm sorry I keep mentioning Ben Shapiro, but I don't know a lot of these guys. I bump into them on the tubes, Rumble and so on. And they have their fancy attention-grabbing, thumbnails, and you go on, and they go on and on and on about things in nauseating confidence. And I just say, wow, gosh, these people really haven't read up on what they're talking about. And it's just unbelievable. But people tend to believe them and feel that they're experts. So I think if you trained your critical thinking skills a little bit with game theory, you would be able to say, maybe I'm being biased here, or maybe they are, and maybe they don't know what they're talking about. Maybe I should do some reading and some studying, and maybe I should find a good teacher who can help me with the subject. And yeah, I'm going to point you to some Yale online courses and stuff at the end of this video series that I hope you'll audit. There's a lot of resources out there to learn about game theory and critical thinking. And I think it's important that we all do that. It was bizarre. This young kid asked the candidates about climate change.
Do you believe in human behavior is causing climate change? Raise your hand if you do.
Look, we're not school children. Let's have the debate. I mean, I'm happy to take it to start. Alexander?
Because he said young people are concerned about it, and nobody would answer the question. They danced around it and changed the subject. They didn't go there. So that's what you've got. So at the end of the day, you're going to prepare yourself for the future we have coming as best you can with the information that you have available to you and with your capacity to understand that information, so the signal. And the rest of it is noise, and basically it's profits first noise. So you got some guy from the pharmaceutical industry or whatever, multi-millionaire, telling you it's a hoax and, frack and drill and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, this isn't that complicated, guys. Unlock American energy, drill, frack, burn coal, embrace nuclear. Put people back to work by no longer paying them more to stay at home. Reform the U.S. Fed, stabilize the U.S. dollar.
He's just playing you. I mean, he's in it for the money. He always was. That's why he has $50 million here and $50 million there. None of these people work for you. None of them. And the CEOs don't work for you. Maybe an innovator or a CEO wants to present or provide a good product or service to the marketplace, and that's good. But they're in it for the money. That's the principal, main motivation and incentive. Keep that in mind. It's not a conspiracy, it's just truth. So I'm going to delve into this now. Bear with me. If it's long, I'll pause and you can get back to it later. Thank you for clicking on this video and watching. I appreciate it a lot because it does take a bit of effort to make. And I realize I'm doing this kind of extemporaneously. I'm not scripting everything, not reading a teleprompter, not being too fancy, but I'm trying to work through these things with you because I'm not the smartest guy in the room, and I'm struggling to learn things, even though I'm an old baby boom geezer. And I just, if anyone's interested in going on this journey with me, I'm very happy to share. So click like and subscribe and tell a friend about this channel, because in the future I'm going to be directing my audience towards some creative projects that I think you're going to find a lot more fun and interesting and exciting and entertaining. This is coming. Trust me. Okay, thanks a lot. I'm getting into it now. Bouliam tea. See you in a minute. Okay, so here we are, ready to go. So like I said before in one of my intro videos, I was walking around that day taking photographs, and I was musing about this stuff. I was taking a course, a Yale online course about game theory, and I was looking at another one. And of course, I was at the Argument Ninja. I did that course, and so on and so forth. They're really fun. And thinking about the biases and history, and thinking about a couple of books I read recently. And at the end of this series, I will, in my conclusions, put all my references for what I've been talking about. And I'll also write a blog post to post on globehackers.com or cospelon.eu, where you can find my conclusion and also all of the references. So if you want to go check it out, check it out. I won't talk about journalism right now and sources and how we know if things are well sourced. Some other time. Everything's connected. So anyway, we have these wars like Iraq and Afghanistan and Vietnam. The list is long, and we've had a lot of run-ins in Africa, and we're winding up to go full tilt into that arena. The United States, that is, Uncle Sam. We're really worried about China for some reason. My, I wonder why. My idea on that. But anyway, all the candidates are talking about how they're going to rein in China and defeat China and save Taiwan and all that stuff. I don't know why Americans need to do that. They were pretty happy with cheap stuff at their big box stores when China was manufacturing it. Maybe we can bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States of America, and then people can slave away for low wages and benefits in a factory. Or maybe the robots will do the shit work, and somehow you can all have YouTube stations and make money. YouTube channels and make money, so you can go buy your stuff that the robots make. I don't know. The future will be interesting. So I'll start off with this thing known as agency bias, and you can look that up with any search engine or whatever you use to look things up. And basically, it's just about unchecked interests, intangible interests. And there's a lot of things that bleed into this, like righteous outrage, glory in status, ideology, aversion to compromise. So things like that, I mentioned that earlier. So there's a lot of references for that, and I'll put that in later, as I said. But anyway, we'll start at the beginning. And number one, we have unchecked interests. So unchecked interests refers to situations where a party's motivations or objectives in a conflict are not properly regulated, monitored, or constrained by external factors. This can lead to unbridled pursuit of self-interest, potentially escalating conflicts. In game theory terms, this could relate to scenarios where one or more parties act to minimize their own gains. What am I doing? Without considering the broader consequences or potential for cooperation. Well, it's interesting. Like with Saddam Hussein and the United States, he was. We knew at a certain point, it was clear in the 90s that he had no weapons of mass destruction. Sanctions and bombing during the Clinton period had bled him dry of any ambitions to have any of that stuff. But from his game theory point of view, he thought that negotiating from strength was important because America's so powerful. You got to convince the world that you're tough and strong. And he was a street thug, Saddam Hussein, when he was a kid. So he's got that mentality, that thug mentality. Not that the U.S. doesn't have it, or Uncle Sam in general doesn't have that as part of his dark triad or dark whatever, tetrad. But I'm not saying the U.S. is any worse than any other place. It's just more powerful. But he thought, I want them to think I'm strong because, let them keep guessing. I'm not going to be transparent. They won't have the information. When you're bluffing in poker, the guy doesn't know what you're holding. But you can't bluff all the time and you can't fold all the time. That's just a recipe for losing and being a crap poker player. So Saddam made a huge mistake by imagining that the U.S. wouldn't throw down and get nasty if he didn't come forward and say, look, I'm sorry, it's true. I'm not going to kick out the weapons inspectors. I have nothing. Come and see. I'm sorry. Just let's make a deal. Leave me alone. At some point, the ability to negotiate goes away. And then you're stuck with something else. And sometimes that's war or fighting. And it's war and fighting is more costly, more risky, more dangerous than negotiating and coming to a deal where both parties get something. They might not get 100%, but they get 40% or some percentage of what they wanted. And they can compromise. It's the same thing in Ukraine, whatever. There's never just one thing that started it. It's a whole chain of complex events. But it's game theoretic. I mean, Putin's thinking, I'm going to mass troops on the border, and the West will back down and, give us the territories that we've been fighting for since 2014 or whatever. And the U.S. is saying, we were here way before you making Ukraine strong, and we think Ukraine's really strong, so we're not backing down. Both sides were very transparent in this situation. Putin has nukes, NATO has nukes. So, Putin has an army, Ukraine has an army. I mean, people know what's going on, and then people make it quite clear. NATO says one thing quite clearly. It's not the idea that they don't know if I have WMD, like Saddam's thinking. I'm going to pretend I'm strong, and then we attack and kill him, And it's similar in Libya and other places. But anyway, so Putin invades, and he was stupid because, America and Ukraine are going to fight. I mean, haven't you been watching the telly for the last 30 years? I mean, they just don't like it when people don't obey, when they push too hard against the Western machine. They don't like it at all. So he screwed up there, had to retrench, build up his military and industrial base and find allies and suppliers and so on and so forth. And so now the war is going to go on and on and on because, the West is rich and powerful. It can afford to print money and make high-tech stuff instead of just making shells, artillery shells that they can just blanket the field with, they're going to send in billions and trillions of dollars worth of equipment, and it's going to get blown up. So Nikki Haley, who owns defense stocks, she's going to make out like a bandit, and you're not. So think about that next time you invest. If you have some ethical reason or ethical basis for investing, then you don't want to invest in the MIC. If you're just out for money, because we're all going to, be boiled off the planet anyway next year or whenever, and you want to get rich and have some fun, then I'd probably put it into military industrial complex stocks and adjacent companies and industries that supply them with stuff that they need. So you look at the Chat GDP thing, AMD stock has gone up again. This isn't because of Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, but because of all the processing power that is needed for these large language models. So if you were clever as an investor, you would have clocked that and said, Jesus, I'm going to buy some of that AMD stock. But, who's a smart investor? I don't know. Not me, that's for sure. So the next one is intangible incentives. And this is really important because you have moral reasons for doing things. You're tired of the bully bullying you, so you ambush him in the middle of the night and beat him over the shins with a bamboo stick until he can't walk for a week. Or somebody beats their wife. I saw a TV series, some obvious abusive nut job beat his wife, and they didn't arrest him. And he got out and he killed her, right? So, so one of the strategies you might use with a person like that, if you were in a Dunbar number 150 person tribe or whatever, where everybody more or less knows everybody, is a couple of the relatives of that woman would go over and beat the living daylights out of the guy. And he would know right then and there that he wasn't going to beat his wife anymore. Now, once we scale up in the world to big cities and city-states and big fortresses where you have 10,000 or 50,000 people, then you need institutions to do that. But you also need ways of shunning people or scolding people or making people afraid of the man upstairs so they don't beat their wives. And that's where, institutional religion comes in. It's really good at doing that. It spins a narrative that you're being watched all the time, not just by the priests and your mom and dad, but by everybody and God. So you better watch yourself. And then you need rule of law and courts and police and all that kind of stuff when you scale up. But still, can you imagine a small community in London where somebody beats the woman and the woman has some brothers? She didn't have brothers in this story. And the brothers go over and ambush him because, you don't want to confront a coward like that. You ambush the motherfucker and beat the daylights out of him. And then, you let it be known that you touch my sister again and your life ends. You're over. So the guy will probably make a better effort of being a good guy. That doesn't mean he won't kill her next time. If the law works efficiently, then it might be good to put this guy away for a while and make sure he got treatment to treat the underlying causes of his anger and frustration and misogyny and criminal behavior. It didn't just, he wasn't born with it. There's trauma there that created that criminal. So if you can treat that as well, you probably have a better result when the guy gets paroled. But then again, are you going to invest in that when you have to make airplanes that cost $300 million a pop so that you can go have proxy wars? What are you going to print money for? Mental health or weapons? So there's moral, ethical reasons. There are ideological reasons. There are a lot of intangible reasons and incentives that push people. They're very dangerous because they're deep. And cognitive dissonance is there to keep you holding on to them despite any evidence. So number 3, righteous outrage. You may be righteously outraged that the goons from the police or the government, military came in and killed your nuns and priests and kidnapped your kids and tortured them. In Syria, they kidnapped kids, tortured them. The people marched on the street, mothers and family members, and they said, bring back our children. And one of the generals said, don't worry about your children. You don't have children now. If you want more children, make children. If you can't make children, send your wives to us and we'll make them for you. So this is pretty cold. If moral outrage or righteous outrage doesn't come out of that, I don't know what's going to make you feel righteous outrage. I mean, you're going to be pissed. And then, just for the moment, you're going to say, I don't care if I die. I don't care if I have to be a rebel for the rest of my life. And the whole world, Russia and the United States and ISIS and everybody else, completely levels my country. I'm going to fight. Because for a minute, I'm going to be alive. For a minute, I'm going to feel like I'm doing something, that I'm free, that I have agency, And so moral outrage can be an incredible driver for this kind of stuff. So intangible incentives and the risk of war. So intangible incentives such as glory, honor, ideological commitment can raise the risk of war because they may lead parties to prioritize their principles or emotional attachments over pragmatic considerations. When rational calculations of costs and benefits do not check those incentives, parties may be more willing to engage in conflict, even when the expected material gains are low. So think of the Crusades, or think of the 30 Years' War, the 100 Years' War, whatever, all those wars in Europe. Think of Hitler, he has these principles, these quasi-religious ideals that he has to have the living space for the blood of the master race and all that stuff. Otherwise, they're going to be wiped out because they're surrounded by enemies. Who's surrounded by enemies? China? Russia? I don't know, but if they perceive they are, they might do something nasty. Might they not? You want to corner a mama bear with her cubs, you might get eaten. Or she, 5 pounds she can crush your skull with one bite. But anyway, whatever. You make bad decisions because you think you are ideologically superior, or you think your freedom and democracy is more important than anything else. Or maybe you don't want to pay taxes. These guys, the candidate, the Republican candidate, I forgot his name, I don't care. He was saying, it's a wet blanket, regulation and climate change scenario, hoax and everything is a wet blanket on the U.S. economy. Well, you keep growing that economy. Keep mining, keep using materials and energy. Just keep doing it. Because the climate, the CO2 and all the other greenhouse gases are locked in. They're not going anywhere. And it's going to get hotter and hotter. And we've already passed the point of no return where tipping points are going to start to happen. You don't want to believe it, that's fine. I'm not here to try to convince you of that. You can do your own research. I hope you learn how to research first. Learn how to perceive the signal and parse it from the noise. That's one of the reasons we're looking at this stuff. So if they have these intangible incentives, they might be more willing to have conflict. So yeah, Putin does have his Dugan and his ideologies and his beliefs, and it may include Orthodox Christian things and so on and so forth. They have their history, they have their identity, they have their reasons for fighting, and so does the West. We want everybody to be like us. And every time Zelensky is talking about all the business we're going to do after we win this war, where's the money going to go? It's going to go to people like Zelensky. It's not going to go to the farmers and all of their dead sons. You can freaking bet on that. And you don't have to be too much of an enthusiastic historian to go read a few books and notice that that happens all the time. Go to globehackers.com book recommendations and have at it. Not that that's an exhaustive list of anything, but it should help you understand the world better if you read one or two of those. I guess you read anyway, or you wouldn't be here. Anyhow, so glory and status. Glory and status can be intangible incentives that drive individuals or groups to seek recognition, respect, and a sense of achievement. In game theory, these incentives lead parties to take actions that elevate their reputation or standing, even if they are risky or costly. Think of Caesar, think of fighter aces in World War I or II. Think of sports stars. You know, people are willing to take risks for glory and status, right? Sam Bankman-Fried, you know, all the bullshit these people sling, the stories that they sell to make lots and lots of money and make you think that they're philanthropists and they're good guys. It's a huge risk, but they want the glory and the status even more than the money. And they're shameless because they're psychopaths. Even when they're discredited and shamed, they still think they were never wrong. All of them. I could list them, but I won't. It's like Trump. He's depressed now because he can't be around his beautiful things for a minute. But until his dying day, he's going to know he was absolutely righteous. And it's for the glory and the status. The money's nice, but he wants the attention. He wants to be in the news. He wants the accolades. He wants to be called president. You know, if he were a fighter ace, he'd want oak leaves and medals, and he'd want to be mentioned in the Stars and Stripes or whatever. You can have glory and status as a NFL player or a UFC fighter or a writer or a filmmaker or a musician or any number of things that don't cause harm to life on Earth or destroy our habitat or destroy the habitat of other vertebrates and so on. We can have it all if we do it right. So ideology, number 6, ideology and aversion to compromise. Wow. You know, sometimes you have an ideological belief and you won't compromise. So people in the United States who hate Democrats or hate Republicans, these people have an aversion to compromise because of ideological reasons. But they might not even be well-educated enough or aware enough to understand that they have ideological biases. They might not even know it, you know. They just think they're right because of the environment they're in, the people they know, the sources of information they have, their emotional, psychological, and intellectual proclivities, and so on. So ideological commitments can create barriers to compromise because they involve deeply held beliefs and principles. In game theory, when parties have strong ideological positions, finding common ground becomes more challenging, as compromise might be seen as a betrayal of those principles. So you don't betray the principles, bro. Omerta, or whatever it is, you know, the commandments. You know, once you want to be close to the guru, you want to eat the guru's leftover, you want to sit at the guru's feet. And once you're in that thing, you're not going to compromise anymore because it's a betrayal. And betrayal is a heavy thing. Number 7, humans exulting in violence. So I think men kind of get off on violence to a certain degree, you know, one way or another. But we also abhor it and fear it. Think of when you were a kid and you were bullied or got in a fight. Most of us don't abhor violence. We don't want to hurt other people. We don't want to get hurt by other people. But we like violent sports. We like violent movies. We like violent video games and computer games. And sometimes we do like, being in a mob and being able to express our anger and violence and frustration. Also just to have the excitement, the adrenaline, the rush, the endorphins of that kind of excitement. So hooliganism is a thing and gangs are a thing, not just for the money, but for the excitement. Some people spend a lot of money to go to a foreign country, watch a football match, and then afterwards go out in the streets and create mayhem. It's the most exciting thing in their lives. It makes them feel alive, So yeah, there are things like that put you in a flow state. And yeah, I think America's a little bit more violent overall than some Western countries, than most Western countries. There are places elsewhere in the world that are much, much worse. Honduras and places like that. Why are they so bad? That's another story. They weren't bad just because they're bad or possessed by the devil. There are reasons they got that way. And, we won't talk about those things here. But anyway, so the next one is compromise. So number one, compromise affects consumer behavior and decision making. So it refers to the tendency for individuals to choose an option positioned as a middle ground between two other options, especially when choosing items with different features or attributes. So sometimes we make a compromise. I'm not going to get the perfect autofocus with this camera, but I don't need it. I can manually focus. What I'm going to get is different options that I need to make a film or whatever. So you compromise there. Compromise is negotiation and conflict resolution. Very important. In the context of negotiation and conflict resolution, the term compromise refers to finding a solution that involves concessions from all parties involved. Compromise consists of reaching an agreement where each party gives up something to some extent to achieve a mutually acceptable outcome. At the Republican debate, there was such moral outrage with most of the candidates, some of them. They were so sure that they're in the right and that Putler is just an evil maniac that they can't imagine compromising. You beat Russia, you kill Russia, and you kill Putin and create a regime change, or not. The idea of losing is just incomprehensible. And really, seriously, unless NATO troops are going to go in, then you really are talking about probably until the last Ukrainian, because they're going to run out of men after a while. And they're going to run out of boots on the ground, and they need people to win this war. And unfortunately, Russia just has more people. And I don't think it's a good idea to do these regime change things, because usually we play with the players, and then if they don't do what we want them to do, we kill them and try to put somebody else in their position. And the same thing happens over again. And, come on, you can look at the past 70 years of history and see that over and over again around the world in these geopolitical games and proxy wars and whatnot. It just doesn't work. There are other ways to do things, and compromise is important. I don't know if there's going to be any compromise with Ukraine. It'll probably just have to burn out in 5 years or something, or maybe something more horrible will happen. And we'll all be victims of the brinksmanship and the poor play of the so-called players who are working for the big players, who are really not that smart. They're not much smarter than you, than any average person. Dunning-Kruger, right? I mean, overconfidence bias. I mean, geez, there's a lot more than that, but oh God. So game theory and compromise. Game theory often explores the strategies and outcomes of decision-making in competitive and cooperative scenarios. In some game theoretical models, compromise can be a strategy players use to reach an outcome that benefits all parties to some degree. And you'll learn that a lot if you take a game theory course. You know, there are these Nash equilibriums and things like that, where people are just trying to find a good outcome. Like I said before, you can play those ultimatum games, and I give you some money, and the thing is, if the person accepts your offer, you get to keep the money. If the person refuses your offer, you both forfeit the money. And, you know, people, if they understand those rules, they should be generous and give quite a bit of money to the other player. But that's not the perfect example. But lots of times people, you know, in the prisoner's dilemma and things like that, you know, people know what they should do for a good result, and they just don't do it, you know, because they're afraid or for other reasons that we're looking at here, various biases and lack of information and so on and so forth. So the ultimatum game, which is what I just mentioned, the ultimatum game is a well-known experimental paradigm in behavioral economics and game theory. It explores how individuals make fairness, cooperation, and resource distribution decisions. The game involves two players, a proposer and a responder. The basic setup of the game is as follows. Proposer. The proposer is given a sum of money, say $10. The proposer's task is to suggest a way to divide the money between themselves and the responder. 2. Responder. The responder's role is to either accept or reject the proposal made by the proposer. If the responder agrees with the proposal, the money is divided according to the proposal. If the responder rejects the proposal, neither player gets the money. The ultimatum game is interesting because it highlights the tension between economic rationality and notions of fairness and equity. From a purely economic perspective, the responder should always accept any positive offer, even if it's a small amount, because any gain is better than no gain. However, experimental results consistently show that responders often reject offers they consider unfair or inequitable, even when it means receiving nothing. This behavior challenges traditional economic assumptions and suggests that social norms and considerations of fairness play a significant role in decision-making. So these experiments have been done around the world with every possible kind of culture, and you even see it with monkeys. You give them a grape or a cucumber, and if the monkey sees that you gave the guy a cucumber and you give me a cucumber, it's okay. But if you give the other monkey a grape and then you give me a cucumber, all hell breaks loose. The monkey gets pissed off. You can see these videos on YouTube, and it's quite amusing. So this also has something to do that I didn't put in here, but it's the multipolar trap. So that's a thing that's rather new, but it has to do with the tragedy of the commons, things like that. It's like, if China doesn't get general artificial intelligence before the United States, then the game is over, because the U.S. will be able to just take over the world with its AGI, artificial general intelligence. Sorry. And so both sides feel, regardless of the risks, that they have to go all out to get it. Or you need a resource and you want to play fair and do things right, rules-based order, international law. But there's lithium in that country or something else you want. And if you don't get it, somebody else will. So when Africa was colonized in the 18th, 19th century by European countries didn't want to fight wars over Africa. They didn't fight much during the 19th century. There was a lot of peace until World War I. But anyway, they would prefer to divide up Africa and say, okay, we'll just divide it up. Portugal, you take some. Belgium, you take some. France takes some. England takes some. Holland takes some. Germany takes some. Italy takes some. We'll divide it all up. And then we can do our colonial thing and we'll all benefit from resources that we're stealing from Africans. Okay, colonialism, not always a bad thing. You bring Jesus or you bring whatever, Disneyland. I'm kidding. But generally speaking, the business interests of the colonies are not the interests of the people there. And they often are very racist and they often dehumanize the local population to such a degree that they abuse them. And eventually trouble happens and you have wars in Angola and Mozambique and all the other places. I'm just referring to Portugal now because those were the most recent colonial wars that happened in our history. And there was a revolution, Carnation Revolution in Portugal that put an end to that. And Salazar and his group lost power because those days were over. But we have neocolonialism. We don't need to occupy the country anymore. We have sanctions, economic sanctions. We have military bases. We have all kinds of other mechanisms to use, loans, the World Bank, the IMF, to control other countries and to make them play the game the way we want it to happen. But anyway, the multipolar trap is just about if I don't do it, somebody else will. So, and then something nasty happens, like all the trees are cut down and then the farmland, the soil gets burned out and then everybody starves. We don't have to worry about that because the climate will take care of all of that for us, and we're all going to live to see that, unfortunately. That's my belief, but again, I'm not an evangelist for fearing climate. I think we should fear what we should fear, and then we should have hope, and then we should do what we have to do. Do what you got to do. So anyway, here's some references. I got a lot more than that, but I'll put those in my blog post when this series is done. So fighter aces. This is really interesting. You can Google this. There's lots written on it. There's newspaper articles you can look at in the archives. There are all kinds of anecdotes that are really fun. Anyway, in my references, some of the books I read referred to this stuff. So I looked it up on the web and made some notes. So Hermann Göring, he was the boss of the Air Force, and he was one of the high-ranking Nazis. A prominent figure in Nazi Germany was the commander-in-chief of the German Luftwaffe. During World War II, he implemented various strategies to incentivize his pilots and create a competitive environment. One of his notable methods was to establish a reward system that encouraged pilots to achieve high kill counts and excel in combat. Think about the NFL. I'm an NFL fan. Sorry about that. So you think about all these elite quarterbacks on one team. They're not just there as backups if the number one guy gets hurt, although that is a consideration. They're there to compete for the number one job. And that drives each quarterback to play better than they would without the competition. I'm not anti-competition. I just think it should be fair. There should be rules that everyone understands, and that it should be played fairly. And it should not kill everybody or destroy things. So competition that doesn't, I can really envision a congressperson who's 35 and has to lead some legionaries into a field of battle in the future where maybe 20 people might lose their lives, and maybe 40 or 50 might get hurt pretty bad. But that's about it. And they face off and have kind of a fair battle using old school weapons, Bronze Age or whatever, classical weapons. And, if you're going to take the risk, you've got to put skin in the game and, be there. Instead of these old people like Dianne Feinstein, who, what are they doing in Congress, for God's sake? What's Joe Biden doing? He's just not strong enough right now to do a great job, but I don't know. I think young people, it's their future. Why let the old people squander it? At some point, young people are going to get angry. And God help you, baby boomer, when that happens. But I'm not saying you blame it on us, because we didn't know anything. We couldn't discern the signal from the noise. We were interested in making a living and so on. We didn't know, but some of us have known since the 70s about climate change, and we've said things about it, but most of us ignored it anyway. Sorry, climate change again. Should use some other example, but, look at all the crazy economic booms and busts and so on. But economics is another thing that's highly complex. Anyway, I digress. So kill counts. So Goering introduced the concept of Knight's Cross, of the Iron Cross, as a prestigious honor awarded to pilots who demonstrated exceptional skill and bravery in aerial combat. This award, presented in different classes, was given to those who achieved a specific number of confirmed enemy aircraft kills. The higher the number of kills, the higher the class of the reward. This incentivized pilots to aggressively engage enemy aircraft to accumulate kills and attain higher status within the Luftwaffe. So you can imagine you're taking more risks to get this reward, right? Risk and reward. I was thinking of something else, but it came out of my head. Anyway, that's a fascinating thing. And they took risks and they died. But, they killed also. So it works. So the competitive environment among fighter pilots during the Battle of Britain, fought between the German Luftwaffe and the British Royal Air Force, RAF, in 1940 contributed to high casualty rates. As pilots sought recognition, promotions, and prestigious awards, they engaged in dogfights and risky maneuvers to increase their kill counts. This pursuit of status and glory often led to daring and aggressive tactics, which could result in increased risks and fatalities. I should have put which results in, because it did result in people dying, and even the mighty German forces with their Axis ran out of men after a while. Like I said before, you look at the retreat of Napoleon's army from Moscow. It's like 800,000 go in, and on the way back, when at the end of the day, 20,000 come back to Paris. They're dying on the way, man. You run out of people, so you can incentivize people, but if they die, So what would you be willing to die for? Think about it. I mean, if you're a Navy SEAL, you know what you're willing to die for. And you're competing for that job, to put yourself at risk. I admire it and respect it. I'm not saying anything against soldiers. I'm just saying that the leaders are not as good of players as you think they are. And the generals report to the politicians, and the politicians report to the corporate overlords. Not the CEO, but these markets and groups of people making the markets and manipulating the markets and sucking up all the capital, the returns, the profits. Those are the people who have the resources to, incentivize the politicians to be stupid. But we're the shareholders. So if we benefit from it, then we're part of the whole game. So some of the notable German fighter pilots who participated in the Battle of Britain and engaged in this competitive environment include, so I would just say look up these guys. It's really fun. So Adolf Galland, Werner Mulders, he was a more serious type dude. This guy was more adventurous. They all have great personalities and great stories. Of course, they're Germans, the bad guys. But if you're not killing really skillful bad guys, then what kind of a fighter pilot are you, man? Yeah, a lot of people say the Germans were really should have lost their invasion of France. And it was some flukes that helped them win. So, but we believe it was Blitzkrieg, the genius of the German military. But it really wasn't. It was some other circumstances that led to their ability to win. They were outgunned, and they should have lost. And it wasn't just genius, Blitzkrieg, And you see that through the whole thing. So we can look at Germany and criticize them and say, they were brilliant, they were genius, but, they lost. Yeah, they were also losers, weren't they? And the Allies weren't all that great either. But in this case, they were much, much better. So, and one could argue that their ideology, way of life, what they were fighting for was much, much better. Have we lost all that? I worry about that. So those are fighter pilots. So the competitive nature of fighter pilots could drive them to achieve remarkable feats. It also led to high casualty rates as pilots took on risky maneuvers to secure victories and enhance their reputation. This dynamic illustrates how external incentives and the pursuit of status can impact individual behavior even in life-threatening situations. Greed is good. Billions. But, they're not risking their lives. They're taking risks with your money for the glory, to have their name on the building. During the Cold War era, particularly in the 1980s, the United States was involved in various geopolitical conflicts around the world as part of its efforts to contain the spread of communism. One such conflict was the Civil War in El Salvador, where there was a struggle between the government, supported by wealthy landowners and military forces, and leftist guerrilla groups representing the interests of peasants and workers. The Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, played a role in supporting the Salvadorian government's efforts to suppress the rebellion by providing military and financial assistance and intelligence. Then they gather all their info and they pass it on to the White House and maybe the Congress, some committees. Maybe they make some decisions or sign off on some stuff, but a bloody mess ensues. People get righteously angry. They decide it's better to become a rebel and die, even if you're not going to get anything at the end of the day for it, than to have these people fucking with you all the time. And it happened in Guatemala and Nicaragua and all over the bloody place for hundreds of years. And people do eventually fight back. But I think with all the tools that the powers that be have now, they're going to lobotomize all of us. We're going to be putty in their hands in the future. We won't know which way is up. And we'll be manipulated and eventually rubbed out. And, the country club won't need so many consumers anymore to be glorious. The winners can compete among themselves on the golf course or whatever. It's important to note that El Salvador was a complex situation. Yeah. But nonetheless, and the CIA in Ukraine? In Africa? Oh no. So here's a little bit more on the CIA in El Salvador. So the CIA's involvement in El Salvador included several strategies to support the government and landowners against the peasant-backed rebels. It's a lot easier to do business for U.S. business interests with powerful people, landowners. So everybody always complains about everyone in Africa being corrupt. And the people down there, they're corrupt, those Southerners, and so on. Well, what are the corrupting forces that make them corrupt? So some of those are intercultural. They come from the culture of the indigenous group. And some of those are extra-cultural. They come from outside. There are influences and there are incentives to make these people corrupt. And you have to be honest and able and willing to look at those things because it's a fact. So anyway, so number one, training and funding. The CIA provided training and funding to the Salvadorian military and security forces. NATO trained pilots. But I'm not for Russia or against Russia or Ukraine. I'm just saying you got to train these people up, and you train them up and put them in the fray way before the kinetic warfare starts. And it happened in Vietnam. You know all about it. Kennedy's reaction to it, Kennedy's reaction to the Bay of Pigs, the overconfidence bias that was involved in people telling Kennedy that that would be easy to win. So this support aimed to enhance the government's ability to counter guerrilla activities and maintain control. 2, counterinsurgency tactics. We've heard of that a lot, haven't we? With Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and other places. The Salvadorian military employed counterinsurgency tactics to suppress rebel movements. These tactics often involved harsh measures that led to human rights abuses and violence against civilians. So what causes human rights abuses? Could it be meddling in other countries' affairs? Supporting powerful interests in that country against people? I don't know, man. You tell me. Look at the history books, look at the data, look at the primary sources, and you tell me. Push, shove, cause and effect. It's all a complex thing coming from many directions. It's a web. It's complicated. It's not just, he kicked me. He started it. Why did he kick you? Because you look funny? I don't know. Anyway, support for landowners and business interests. The U.S. government and the CIA aligned with the interests of wealthy landowners and business elites, opposed to leftist rebels. This alignment aimed to protect the economic and political status quo. So pom-pom boys, you go ahead, you be a cheerleader for Rachel Maddow and Anderson Cooper and all their pundits with their overconfidence bias, and you just, drive it, baby. Subscribe to The Economist and just stay in that lane and see what it gets you. For now, it's getting you quite a lot, so you can celebrate, buy some champagne. Don't forget to give me a glass. Send me a cigar from Cuba. Number 4, intelligence sharing. The CIA provided intelligence support to Salvadorian government, helping it gather information about guerrilla activities and plan insurgency operations. Do you think there's intelligence being given to Ukraine? I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but are some of these strikes and tactics and strategies coming from abroad? Or can we just blame Ukraine if they lose the war and we pull out and Russia wins? And we say, well, they were incompetent. They didn't perform the way we thought they'd perform. We were pretty confident that if we got these guys in place, they'd win. They'd bleed Russia dry. and we'd get some business-friendly guy in there who wasn't a wet blanket on the economy. You read the books, read the first and secondary sources, and you tell me. Apply your critical thinking skills. 5, political and diplomatic support. The U.S. government used diplomatic channels to support the Salvadorian government and portray its efforts as part of a global struggle against communism. There has to be a story, and there has to be a big enemy that's able and dangerous. And you have to have a whole story around that. What is communism? Who knows? Depends on how you study it, what books you read. If you've read Marx and Engels and everybody else, and you've really thought about it. If you've seen any examples of it on any scale, Dunbar or larger, where there's communism, you tell me, is there? I don't know. I think I know better than some people, but I don't know if you know better than me. The CIA's involvement in El Salvador was controversial and drew criticism from human rights organizations and advocacy groups due to allegations of human rights abuses committed by Salvadoran security forces and paramilitary groups. The conflict resulted in a significant loss of life and displacement. So we have refugees coming out of Syria and the Middle East. WikiLeaks leaked information that highlighted crimes and human rights abuses by the United States and the coalition forces. And these are real. They can't be disputed. So what do? You kill the messenger. If you go against Caesar, you go against Rome, you get crucified. Maybe it's your fault because you did what you thought was right and you took the risk. Maybe you were prideful, so you have the sin of pride. So you get tortured and put to death, humiliated and put to death. And of course, Trump is worried because you're crucifying Trump. Will the second trumping come or not? I don't know. But do you feel sorry for Trump? You don't feel sorry for Julian because they told you that the information about these crimes caused problems for the players. And you're just a guy in Idaho that has a small little farm, but you think, wow, that's not good. You hate Americans, but you love the CIA, but you hate the deep state. So many contradictions. So here's some references about El Salvador. There's so many more. So I'm going to take a break here, and I'll continue this later. Thank you for listening. Julian T. out.
So, in between all the game theory stuff, because it's a long one, I'm taking a break at the park, Don Carlos Park in Caldas da Rainha, Portugal, having some of my comfort food. Sausages, cheese, risotto, bread, and vinho verde. So as soon as I'm done with this diversion in the park, I'll get back to the video. Thanks.